The big story tonight is the case of Matilda Onyango, who died two weeks ago and whose body is now lying at the MP Shah Hospital. She went there in a state of emergency after being stabbed. She was in hospital for 10 hours receiving treatment from there. The bill accrued was 850,000 shillings. Her body still there, her family trying to raise the funds to get her body out. For every day her body continues to lie at the MP Shah morgue, it's accruing an extra 2,000 shillings over and above that over 850,000 shillings that was spent during her treatment. And tonight it then puts the spotlight on the cost of healthcare in this country. Dr. Atwoli, would the universal healthcare system then be the solution to situations like this?
As correctly conceptualized, universal health coverage would mean using mostly public resources to ensure that the public are protected from these unsustainable and catastrophic health expenditures when they need it most. In other words, when they have a problem that requires a lot of resources to take care of, that there is a system that insures them and covers them and ensures that they can receive treatment when they need it. And so, as we discuss universal health coverage, we should not only discuss the financing side, which seems to be exciting a lot of people, especially in government, because of the amounts of money that they're talking about, but we should be talking about the quality of the service across the country, because the whole idea of universal health coverage is that no matter how rich or how poor you are, you have access to a certain package of health services, wherever you are, of the same quality and of the highest available quality. So we should talk about quality of services. We should talk about availability of medicines, availability of equipment across the country to deliver a certain package of care. So the coverage is not coverage for all diseases. The coverage is to ensure that everyone is covered for a certain package that is determined using evidence. For instance, one of the pieces of evidence you could use would be to look at what are the top causes of death in this country and what are the top causes of disease in this country. And then you say this package will be covered by the fund that is set aside for universal health coverage. And therefore, if the road traffic accidents are a big killer and a big cause of poverty in this country, then you would say this money will help to reduce the catastrophic health expenditures due to road traffic accidents. If it is cancer, then you would say this money will be spent on reducing the burden of cancer on our family, and so on and so forth. And over time, progressively, we will reduce the health burden and improve the productivity of the population such that they will increase the GDP and be able to cover even more conditions and even more things that they think would improve their health coverage. An important aspect of universal health coverage is preventive and promotive care. We should be in a position to prevent a lot of the conditions that fester in our population and result in complications that eventually require us to spend huge amounts of money at the family level to take care of. We should promote health by, for instance, ensuring that maternal care for children who are being born is good, ensuring that we eliminate the use of tobacco in this country, minimizing the use of other substances, including alcohol, ensuring our drivers on the roads are disciplined and so on. And this will reduce the eventual costs of complications that arise from our lack of these particular facilities. Okay. So universal health coverage is broader and goes further than just looking at money spent on curative services.
Curative services, preventive services, that's what you're saying. But even beyond having everybody on NHIF or some sort of form of insurance, Dr. Ng'ani, I mean, isn't there much more that needs to be done? Do we have enough hospitals across the country? Are they properly equipped to be able to deal with all manner of cases, such that if Matilda, had this unfortunate incident happening in Turkana or in Kakamega or in Kilifi or in Tana River, for example, or in the heart of Murang'a, that she would be able to access a facility that had the right equipment, that had the right medicines and the right specialists? I mean, when we're talking about universal healthcare, it's about a lot more than just ensuring everyone is on NHIF, for example, isn't it?
Yes, you're absolutely spot on, Yvonne, and I wish you'd be, people would hear clearly what you've said. And building on what Professor Atwoli has said, universal healthcare is actually a triad of three key components. Number one is financial risk protection, which is where the insurance companies or institutions such as NHIF would come in, but also there's improved access to healthcare. and then there is improved outcomes. So all these three things must be the components of a successful universal healthcare coverage system. Now, for us to achieve improved access and improved outcomes, which are more important, then you have to look at the building blocks of health systems. Number one, human resources for health. How do we grow the number of people available in every single county as far as Turkana or Lamu, whichever other county there is? We are short of about 40,000 doctors, but at the same time, in our country today, we have about 1,400 unemployed doctors, which is a clear mismatch in resources and allocation and prioritization of healthcare. We have issues such as leadership and governance. And by far, our biggest weakness as a country has been corruption, not just in other sectors, but also in healthcare, which is not immune. And so we have systems such as NHIF, where they try to put in a bit of money in healthcare, but it's bedeviled by corruption by both NHIF workers, healthcare workers, and institutions. We have provision of medicines and supplies. This is a big problem across the country. You look at, very, very basic commodities and drugs cannot be found in major hospitals across the country. Very few counties have made it mandatory to have essential drugs in those facilities. Infrastructure, building a modern facility in every county is a necessity. We are working with hospitals that were built as far back as 1920s. Other places, you really don't even have a facility. You have to go as far as 70 kilometers to get access to a facility. Indeed, even for Matilda, I really have a strong feeling that had we built our system to the point where we have pre-hospital care, that she was taken to hospital not by neighbors, but by trained healthcare workers in an ambulance setting, then there's a good chance she could have, had a better chance of survival. But you see, these kinds of interventions have to be intentional. And intentional means we have a policy window where we have political goodwill and we have the people who are willing to put in the effort going ahead to do that. I have said before that for healthcare to change, we need to put a lot of structures in place, but key amongst this is leadership that I call a PAIVA leadership. PAIVA being leadership with passion, integrity, vision, and ability. To know what is needed for healthcare, to have the ability to do it, and to have a vision that can really move the public health sector forward.
All right. So, Nerima, what options do Matilda's relatives have at this point? What sort of advice would you give to them? And I'm sure they're not the only ones. I'm sure there's a number of families who are watching this show tonight who might be going through the same.
Well, there are a number of options available to them. Obviously, one of the easiest routes they could approach is they could approach the Medical and Nurses Practitioners Board and lay a complaint. They could approach the courts and bring in a petition whereby they could get a hearing and a ruling from that. They could obviously appeal internally within the complaints mechanisms of MP Shah Hospital and see through that process what relief they might get. They could also go further and consider that Section 15 of the Health Act has obligated the national government to provide an emergency healthcare fund and use that section to oblige the government to cater for the fees, because the failure to have such fund is part of the reason why they're in the position that they're in. And the continuous need for such a fund is becoming more and more apparent every day. I think there is a need to emphasize that the national government and county governments, so to speak, have to be held accountable for health services. Private healthcare facilities do have a role to play, and they are obligated in terms of the human rights framework because they do have a horizontal relationship with the patients. However, the national government is the direct duty bearer and the person that is directly accountable as the county governments. Therefore, the starting point for me would be for us to consider what is our rallying call to our national government? While these cases continue in our country, what are they doing to shift the narrative on these issues? We have heard the same story over and over again. It's not just Matilda, it's not just Alex Madaga. This happens to nearly every family in our country, whereby even though it's not that they hold your body hostage, it's that you actually are almost poor after you leave the hospital. You spent $2 million over 2 weeks. It's disheartening. And what is our government doing to minimize that? Yes, universal health coverage is a way to do it, but it has to be done properly. And the first thing that I would suggest is, as we go into any discussion on UHC, we have to consider what is a human rights-based approach to UHC? How do we ensure that when we're financing, we're not just putting in money, but we're having fair financing? That means equitable financing. That is, consider who are the most vulnerable groups, who are the most marginalized groups. We have women, we have children. Don't just put money in a pot and say it's going to be spent. We have to prioritize, set priorities, and then finance equitably, considering who are the most vulnerable and who are the most marginalized. Poor households should not have the same risks as rich households, or poor households, low-income households should not have the same risk as rich households. Another thing to consider as we discuss UHC is we have to have a multi-sectoral approach to UHC. We can't just consider UHC within the lens of medicine as curative or medicine as dealing with the disease, because health as defined in the Constitution, health as defined in our Health Act is not just the absence of infirmity, but mental, physical, and social well-being. With that in mind, we have to consider how do we then ensure that we have a healthy society, not just people that are not going to hospital, but people who are healthy. There are other things to consider, such as what's a multi-sectoral approach? You can see the needs in the education sector for health. We can have mental health questions. How many girls can't go to school because they can't access menstrual products? We have CSE, comprehensive sexuality education. How many students are going through school not understanding their reproductive health, their sexual health, their well-being? These are things to consider as we discuss UHC, and not just to focus on what financing is in the narrow scope, but what fair financing is, what human rights is, and how to prioritize, set priorities, and make sure that when we do set priorities, we are financing them in an equitable manner.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for that. I just want to get into feedback tonight as we close the show and our discussion. At Sayoyo Griffith, you say, Law 101 on emergency medical treatment, the National Patients Charter decreed by the Ministry of Health in Kenya in 2013 clearly stipulates the right to emergency treatment irrespective of the ability to foot the bill. I think Nerima was saying they could, compel the government to pay for this bill because they are required to put in place an emergency fund. Purity Ngigi says, may God fight for the weak in this country, because not even those who should be helping us are. Hospital bills are making people sell land and houses just to get a body. And there's so much more disheartening feedback here. Maclina says, it seems like it's more expensive than a night at Kempinski or Radisson Blu, referring to the bill that was accrued there. George Amolo says, if Matilda could have received emergency care by ambulance paramedics, maybe she'd have survived. And Haron Getui just simply says, who says we're all equal? Simon Baraza says that's the wonder of our nation. So we continue with that. Fanuel Kataka finally says our health system is malnutritioned. The sucker bellies, are the key stakeholders. Liberal 101, Atabuya Jr. says this is not acceptable, robbing patients of their money in the name of Medicare. The hospital should be investigated. Like we said, they have given their side of the story to Sophia Wanuna this evening. We'll wait to see what options are available to them. I want to thank my guests very much, Nerima Were from Kellen, Kenya, Dr. Victor Ng'ani, and Dr. Lukoye Atwoli. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being on The Big Story tonight. Thanks for watching our show. The Primetime News is up next. I'm Ivana Kwara Matole. Good night.